Thanks for joining me in this video about Skyrim with the Requiem overhaul, and today I'm going to talk about Alchemy. So what I'll be talking about is first the system as it exists now. I'll highlight some of the problems that I think it creates for game balance and the overall role-playing experience you get when playing Requiem, and then I'll offer a few solutions. So, like all the other perk trees, the Alchemy tree gets a big overhaul within Requiem, and in addition to the typical perks which you would see about increasing poison effects, there's also these pretty cool ones which will do things like boost your health, or give you regeneration, or boost your magicka, stuff like that, which give you some payoff to getting a high level alchemy. And the other really noticeable difference within Requiem is that it's much easier to gather common ingredients because each patch of mushrooms or flowers or whatever that you pick will often give you several ingredients for a single patch. So these are good things for the most part, and I think make alchemy much more interesting than it was in the base game, where it's honestly quite boring. But it does invite some problems which I think have a big effect on how the Requiem experience plays out for you, unless you put in some self-imposed limitations like I have on this current character, where, as you can see, there are no alchemy perks. But that's the system as it exists now, and I think there's some logic to it in why the Requiem developers decided to do it this way. And one of the big reasons, I suspect, is that especially in earlier versions of Requiem, it was very hard to find things to do early on to level your character, because even early bandits were and are still somewhat of a very difficult fight, where you couldn't really take them on at level 1 unless you had a lot of patience, or you just had played the game a lot and were pretty confident in your just manual combat skills. And the other nice thing about the alchemy tree is that if you're a mage, it gives you some avenue to increase your survivability. Even if, say, you were pumping all your points into magic, once you level alchemy high enough, you can take some of these perks that will make you less likely to die all of a sudden. So it gives you some nice payoff for your otherwise kind of squishy characters. So there's definitely a logic behind why alchemy is the way it is within Requiem. However, I think that along with that have come some problems, especially from a balance standpoint, when you use alchemy heavily within your playthrough. And there are 3 problems that I wanted to highlight. First is that ingredients are too plentiful. Second, that it's too easy to identify ingredients and make potions. And third, the effect that this has on the economy. So let's talk first about the plentitude of ingredients. And just to give an example of this, I'm going into one of my favorite little early bandit caves, which is White River Watch. It's very close. You can get to it very early in the game. The enemies in it aren't especially difficult, and it's absolutely full of alchemy ingredients. So there's mushrooms everywhere. A lot of the barrels also have ingredients within them. So just by clearing out this little cave and picking the mushrooms you can probably stock up well over 100 alchemy ingredients and make dozens and dozens of potions just off this quite small little bandit camp. So why is that a problem? The issue that I think the plentitude of alchemy ingredients creates is it's much too easy to level alchemy and thereby level your character past the early levels. And again, in the earliest versions of Requiem, where it was extremely hard to get past the first, say, 3 to 5 levels, this made sense, because you may want to have early on, you're basically a pacifist. You just go around, you pick ingredients, you make potions, you sell them, you level your speech and your alchemy until you can get a few more perks, and then eventually you're ready to go. But the early game has been tuned down somewhat in version 3.0 and forward. Bandits are not quite as deadly as they once were. It's actually more feasible for you to take them on at an early level because their gear is not quite as bad. There have been changes to the armor system as well. I won't go into that in great depth, but you can read the developer notes if you're really curious about the difference that happened in 3.0. And I think this feature of alchemy, with lots of ingredients and being very easy to level early on, is still kind of a holdover from the earlier versions of Requiem, where that was a necessity in order to get your character up and running, especially if you weren't taking combat perks early on. But I don't think that right now it serves as much of a purpose as it once did, and in fact it can make the early game a little bit too easy, because you can just run around these plains of Whiterun around here picking ingredients. You can go to the farms, collect a bunch of wheat, and then pretty soon your character is you can get to level 10 easily without actually doing any combat. And I'm not sure if that's really the intended design for a role-playing overhaul. The second issue I wanted to highlight is that it's too easy to identify the effects of alchemy ingredients. And that really just comes down to this perk here. If you take the first perk in Alchemical Lore just makes it possible for you to create potions, basically. The second perk makes it so if you eat one ingredient, you can identify all the effects of that ingredient, which I think is just plain broken. And by broken, I mean it breaks some of the core functionality in the original game of Skyrim, where you'd have to go and locate little recipe, like you'd either buy from a merchant to find recipes that you would use, or you'd experiment to figure out what ingredients did. And I think in base Skyrim, you actually had to take multiple perks in order to identify more and more ingredients of a potion, and it was gated behind. It's been so long since I played base Skyrim, but you had to be, I think, at least 25 or 50 in alchemy before you could be fully identifying what ingredients did. Whereas with Alchemical Lore, you could just, with your first 3 perks, put 2 points into Alchemical Lore, 1 point into speech over in haggling, so that you could sell your potions profitably, and then you are off and running. You just go around, pick ingredients, make potions, sell them, and you can get to level 10 or so very easily, just training up your skills at skill trainers to eventually get to where you want to be without actually engaging in the early game of Requiem and effectively skipping straight to the mid game, which maybe that's a feature. Maybe that's intended so that people have the option to do that, but I do think it cuts away from some of the early game fun and difficulty of Requiem when you have such an easy way to skip over this core part of the game, the early game, which I also think happens to be some of the most fun you can have. The third effect of alchemy that I wanted to talk about for balance is the effect that it has on the economy. And I probably don't have to say too much about this, because for anyone who is a veteran of Requiem and has experienced the alchemy system, well, you probably already know what I'm talking about, where after you get the first couple of perks, like say you take these first 2 here, then you pretty quickly level up to 25, you take the improved elixirs, and then eventually you get up to catalysis and you're making multiple potions at once. About the time you get to catalysis, which can happen as early as level, say, 10 or 12 pretty regularly, then your biggest problem becomes finding vendors that still have gold left for you to take with all of your potions, because you will have bought out literally everybody. You will have bought out every alchemist within the province of Skyrim. And it eventually gets to the point where you sell all of your potions, you use that to buy new ingredients from the vendors, you make more potions, and gold becomes effectively unlimited, and at a very early stage in the game, much earlier than you could accomplish with any of the other crafting systems that are available, simply because alchemy ingredients are so plentiful. And I think this can really detract from the enjoyment of a playthrough, because not only is the scarcity of gear ruined because you have functionally limitless gold, it also means that skill training is functionally limitless, so you can advance whatever skill you happen to be using at a very, very rapid pace without actually engaging a lot of the gameplay content. And it also just ends up taking up a lot of your time because you're consumed by this need to sell off this huge stock of potions, which is taking up your inventory space. Of course, you have the choice as a player to not engage with that system, which is what I've intentionally done with this character. I just decided I wasn't going to do any alchemy. But that seems like a very half solution, where you have to intentionally choose not to use a broken aspect of the game as opposed to it just being a little bit more balanced. So I do have a couple of suggestions that, well, there's no particular reason that the Requiem developers should listen to me, but here's my opinion. First, if it were up to me, the second perk of Alchemical Lore would be, you wouldn't be able to take it with no skill in alchemy. It doesn't make any sense from a role-playing perspective that your character, who just hopped off the cart in Helgen, would suddenly be able to identify every aspect of an alchemical ingredient just by having a little taste. There's no reason you should be able to just take both of these right at the start of the game. The ability to have full knowledge of alchemical ingredients should require more skill in alchemy. I think you should have to have at least 25 or maybe 50 alchemy skill in order to take the second perk here. That alone, I think, would be a huge improvement in the early game experience of playing with alchemy, because you actually have something to aim for, and the process of exploration where learning what different ingredients do to create specific potions would require a bit more effort on the part of your character, much like it does in every other single skill tree. I think it's just an oversight that you're able to take both of these perks right at the start of the game. The second change that I might suggest is having some more alternatives available to make a light armored or mage character tanky, aside from just within the alchemy tree. Because as it is, you're really kind of hobbling your character if you choose not to do alchemy, because that's where you get these big HP, regen, poison immunity, and magicka boosts. And I did want to highlight on this line, the evasion tree, which is kind of interesting because there's not actually any defensive perks within the evasion tree. Agility gives you more move speed. Most of the rest of these are about making your power attacks better, or about making your stamina better. And it's not until you get to level 100 in evasion that you actually get a defensive perk, which it strikes me as slightly odd, and I think there should be more defensive options available for evasive characters. And mages get alteration to try and boost their survivability through the various mage armor perks. However, I do think that there should be more options available besides just alchemy to make your light armored or mage character tanky. So those are the suggestions that I would have if I were making balance to the changes to the game. Those are the areas I'd be looking in. But we have the system we have. There's no particular reason to think that it would change, because Requiem, I'm sure the developers have many other priorities besides this one, and it's obviously up to them because they're the ones contributing their time, and I have a great deal of respect for what they've done with the game and their own choices in it. But if you as a player want to avoid some of the brokenness of alchemy, what can you do? My first thought would be, well, the extreme version is just don't use alchemy as just a self-imposed limitation, as I've done with this character. The other option, which I've done and has been kind of fun for me, is if you take a character race that it has the ability to create potions at the start of the game. Effectively, it's like having the Alchemical Lore Rank 1 as one of your starting attributes, which it's an ability given to most of the elf races as well as the Bretons, where you can create potions without an alchemy perk. Well, that leaves you the ability to engage with alchemy. You can level up your character with it, but you don't end up taking... You put very minimal points in, or no points at all, into alchemy, but you can still make some potions, which it's a nice quality of life feature because you're less likely to run out of health and magicka, and your character gets to still have some fun picking plants and making potions, but you are foregoing a lot of the economy destroying aspects of it, because your potions will not be that strong because you're not taking these boost to perks or the catalysis, which can really ruin the late game economy for you. So those are my suggestions. If you're playing the game and you find yourself becoming bored because alchemy is hurting your long-term experience, those are some ways around it. If you're new to Requiem and you haven't experienced the alchemy system, I'd highly encourage you for your first character to give it a try, because it is kind of call it a leg up you can give yourself, is by investing heavily in alchemy early on, because anytime that you feel like you're under-leveled for the content, you can go pick some ingredients and make some potions. So if you're a new player, I'd encourage you to play around with alchemy, but don't go too overboard with it, because you can very easily ruin your long-term enjoyment of the game, or of that particular character within the game, if you go too heavy in it. But those are my thoughts on the alchemy system. Obviously, this is just my opinion and my experience of playing characters in Requiem, so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts as well, and hopefully we can have a productive discussion about it. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next video.